All right. So as mentioned, lecture videos, homework is posted. It's due a week from Wednesday. Depending on the state of things, by the middle of this week, I do reserve the right to throw another assignment at you on Wednesday that might be due the week after that, at some time between this Wednesday and that Wednesday. As we get to the content that would be on that assignment, I want to throw it your way. So to give you a sense of the upcoming schedule, this is the start of week 2. We're taking our first exam at the end of next week. So by this Friday, I will get you a study guide with topics. Remember that you get an 8.5 by 11 sheet of notes. You can fill that front and back with whatever you want. I design all of my exams to not just be regurgitate, but more like problem solving, what you've been doing in class. Like Friday, something like this kind of question where you would produce this kind of response. And it is very difficult to prepare for that on a note sheet. Aside from, here is the associated syntax. Here is how you take a problem that looks kind of like this, and here's what a solution looks like. But there's still a lot for you to know about how to go through that problem solving process. So practice is really important for that. That exam will probably cover the first assignment and a half worth of material. So I don't yet know exactly what. I tried to throw as much as I could on that first assignment, but we'll see what additional stuff from that might need to be covered and beyond that. But I will make sure that that goes on the study guide. The day before the exam, we'll take the entire period to do an exam review. And I let students lead that, so come with whatever questions you want, and we will go over additional examples of whatever you find useful, want more practice on to get you prepared for that exam. So that's still a week and a half out. I'm not terribly concerned about that at this point. I just want to get it on your radar as far as what the upcoming schedule looks like. Questions on schedule or where we are in course content, course material? Anything else? Yeah.
Will we get our homework back before the exam?
You'll certainly get this one. So it'll be due a couple days before. I usually, especially if it's right before an exam, I grill my TA to say, you have 24 hours to return this homework. I know it's really tough on them to get that turned around in time, but that is one of the most important parts of this course, is that you have feedback on your homework submission before you take an exam. And there are a couple of points in the schedule where I anticipate that being pretty tight.
Oh, and we do the turn it in early.
Yeah, I did that last time where if you've submitted homework ahead of the deadline, then I can guarantee it's back by something like the exam review date. So maybe I can do something like that, especially for this homework. We've probably covered all of it well before it's due. So if you submit it a day or two early, that gives the TA a little bit more time, less crunch on him to make sure that everything's turned around in 24 hours. All right, anything else?
Nope.
All right, so we covered DFAs. We introduced them, we defined them, we got 3 examples of creating them. And there was just one more that I wanted to do. So this is the last one that we covered, which was the character A followed by some string W, followed by the character A. W could be anything in the star closure of the alphabet, A and B, and it produced this diagram. We start at the start state Q0. If we see a B at the very beginning, there's no way that fits AWA. It has to start with an A, so we lead to a trap state. We loop on that trap state no matter what character we see. If we see an A, we've seen the first part of a solution. So from there, we can see anything. A B, we stay here waiting to see that last A, or we see an A. When we see an A, we don't know if it's the last A or if there's stuff past that. So we have to assume for the moment that it's the last A and go to an accepting state. It says if the string ended here, then we would accept. If we see more A's, we stay in that accepting state. Each one of those A's could be the last A. And if any one of them is, then we stop there and accept the string. If we see a B, on the other hand, we now are at the state where everything we've seen is a string that does not end with that A. So we have to be in a state that does not accept it. Then if we see an A again, we're back to, maybe we've seen that last A. If it is, we accept. Or A's, it just loops that process back and forth. Last example problem. Think about that same language, but now we're going to duplicate it. So L squared just says we're going to take some string from the language and concatenate it to some string from the language. So how would we represent L squared in terms of set notation, or in terms of what that string would look like? It's almost all of these. Right.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that.
Yeah.
Wouldn't L squared be, starts with an A, and then it has some string W, which could be, you know, the star closure of A and B.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another A, and then there's another A, and then again the W, and then an A.
Very close. What does this assume that is not good? Yeah,
There can probably be just one A in the middle, right?
I think we do need the two A's in the middle in this case. That is a good point, but that's a good guess. Yeah,
That two strings are the same, but there's a.
yes.
Yeah.
When we use this W, we are defining it to be some particular string. So we don't need that W to be exactly the same, so we will just denote that there is a subscript on those W's that say that these can be separate.
Gotcha.
And we will just use the exact same such that W is a member of the star closure of AB. So let's take a stab at this DFA. So design a DFA that works for this language.
Isn't it the same DFA?
It is not, because as soon as we've seen AW1A, we need to see another AW2A. So we can't have that old accepting state still be an accepting state. That said, that's a pretty good hint. Start with what you produced for the last one, and that gets you partway there. Question? Order matters in the.
W1.
It actually doesn't matter because we haven't defined what W1 and W2 are. So if we said something like, all right, for a particular one, W1 may be BBA and W2 may be lambda. It doesn't matter. Yeah, if you flip these, it's still in the length. So we just define that W1 is whichever one comes first and W2 whichever one comes last. Good question.
I do have another question. So of
Yeah.
course, building a DFA is kind of like the point of the exercise, but if we were given this as a problem, could we prove that it's regular, not by building a DFA, but just by showing that like you can treat W1 AA W2 as being just a W from the previous DFA, and the previous DFA.
So you would have, so like run through this DFA, run through this DFA again.
Well, our previous DFA proved that L is regular, and this DFA is basically just a special form of L, because W1 AA W2 is
Gotcha.
included in the set defined by
Yeah,
W from the
so
previous link.
basically this must be a member of that.
Yeah,
Therefore,
so that would be a valid proof, right? But like not the same as constructing.
Yes.
Okay.
yep,
Okay, but we should probably make the DFA.
just for practice. That is a good point, and it's really good to be able to see. Absolutely. Being able to tie these kinds of things together is the kind of intuition that you want homework problems. It will help you throughout the course. So really good to be thinking a little bit outside the box and tying things together.
Okay.
And if this one's and because it has two A's on all, and you just so whatever rates this is actually far away. Because we at least have to have, we at least have 4 A's that can do it, and it's not that trap state. Then. It'd be, it should just be on itself. Because then just, let me say, second to the Tuesday. But if this is A, we can just still. Have a. That's what's still. Yeah, so that's. Probably the name or something, yeah, this is my shroud, in which cases. See, so it's, yeah, try not to have 3 A's, get it, no problem, sit back, get that. I think, that way, please, why that is. Yeah, no, because this is just W. Or this, this is also state, this is. Also. Yeah, it is both of those, the W doesn't try to respond, it just picks on this sense that. So A, B, A. And A. A.
The private student union. Or at least let's learn this, then the A, then there's this, who's doing A or B. And it finishes with A. Then for the second one, you can go back to number 2. With another. It's not go back to the A's and the W's and the rest.
Okay. Yeah, I think so, but I do think that there's 2 that has second.
Might not be B.
No, not if it's gonna be deterministic. That's, yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how to. Get past it first, doesn't even. So. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So here's what we had before. With Q2 being an accepting state. I think it's apparent that Q2 should not be an accepting state. What else do we need to change from this? Because we're gonna leave this almost completely untouched. There's one small other change we need to make as we move forward. What does that change? Yeah,
Okay, need A that moves on Q2, go to another state.
yeah, so we're gonna change this to instead, there's gonna be some other state that we're gonna go to. So this Q1 says that we've seen the first A before W1. So one thing to think about as you're doing this is, so what if we have some string that has multiple possible decompositions for what W1 and W2 could represent? So maybe we have some string, we could even say like a bunch of A's. 6 A's in a row. What's W1 and W2? So here would be starting A, ending A, starting A, ending A, where W1 is empty and W2 is AA.
Mhm.
We could also have starting and ending be there, so W1 and W2 are both A's. Or we could have W1 as AA and W2 as the empty string. That's possible as well. Do we need to consider that in the design of this DFA?
Not really, because it's just seeing if the string is in the language. So
Right.
as long as it is okay, it passes, we're good.
Right, so when we take this second A, instead of looping on Q2 and saying, well, we're gonna go back and forth between this concept and try to figure this out. In fact, should this B actually go back to Q1?
Yes. Because otherwise you have a space in between the two A's, which we don't have a W for.
So if this A is sure to represent the end of W1, the last A, basically saying W1 is not going to contain any A's. Is there any possible way that we could, is there any counterexample to that?
I would have been flipped away. I was gonna say, you started with the first, you're gonna go with the D, but you're not even close to the stage.
Yeah, so I guess we could have A, and then we want to include some B's and some A's, and then some more B's, and then an A that ends the thing, and then another A that starts, and then some stuff, and then an A that ends it, even a couple A's. What's not to say that this is W1 that ends here. There's no second A, so yeah, we do have to see two A's in a row in order to move forward, and that's gonna be the reason why we need to go back if we see an A followed by a B, is we need to see those two consecutive A's to be able to move from W1 on to W2. But yeah, if we see anything like this where there are choices that we're going to make, we're gonna make the assumption that W1 is as small as possible. The first AA that we see is going to shift from W1 to W2. Even if there are multiple possible, there's no way for us to know that when we see the first AA. So we need to assume that that's going to be what moves us from W1 to W2. Right, take a minute or so and see if we can finish this up. I think we have a good start here. Remember that you are welcome to work in small groups. This does not have to be a solo exercise unless you want to have shot first. No one caught that. Or if anyone did.
Is that a reference to Tombstone?
Han Solo shooting Greedo before Greedo shot Han Solo.
Of course. Well, doing my darndest. I guess I just start with the constant, right? The middle, beginning, the end is just. I figured it out. I'll let you know.
Like that designation for them as well.
Yeah. The unhappy state. The friend zones. Zoned by the autonomous, not accepted.
Good to see you in person.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Finally happy to be here. Actually, I'm just visiting you.
Fully recovered,
Yes.
all good to go.
Sure.
How was attending remotely? Was that
It was great.
reasonable? It was, you
Yeah.
were able to keep up and feel like you're part of the class?
No, it's awesome because like I was,
So I think there's one case that I think, I think this works if we assume the W2.
You made it so easy.
Really, but my theory was, just started with the parts I knew.
Good to know.
Cause I, the last
Basically,
quarter I got,
broke it
I
down.
got to take care of it.
Two versions
Last
of the
winter, I
same
got to
thing
take
we had
over
before.
for weekends and I basically bedridden myself,
But
trying
I
to
think this
recover
is
from the next day of class.
W2.
Yeah.
And it took every single day.
H1A or 1B.
Not getting out of it. I am going to be ready to teach when, yeah,
These don't work.
plus few weekends that are 3 weeks.
Thursday, which
To that, it's like,
And then you
I can't do that, like, I can't do
A or a
that.
B, and as long as
No,
you
it's
can
understandable.
be,
It's
it's very clear.
Yeah. It's like, it's also a win-win kind of situation.
And then we've got, if you get another A, now you
Yeah,
got two.
yeah, it's great.
But probably I could just remove these.
I just love the implication of you sitting in bed willing yourself to be better.
My body doesn't function and my brain is just like, all right, put all of this energy into both.
If I get
You got this and you sustain.
If you're in W1
Mhm.
and then you get an A and a B.
This real life video game is just this totally word. Video games going on in my
You
mind.
haven't seen two consecutive.
That's how it felt like. I actually got sick.
If I get
two weeks before.
Oh, yeah, that's true, yeah, that's.
Oh, no
Oh
wonder.
my gosh.
And I work with the.
Because A and then A,
Characters,
right?
so I can't go to work.
I
That's
get
trend.
A, but I could get
That's
a,
rough.
but I could get here from
I don't know
having
my
a B.
last.
This
You have any idea what it was?
I went and got a COVID test and I got.
This is almost, this is identical to W1.
Yeah.
And I just made a transfer out on the second A.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I got bronchitis about halfway through vacation here.
Well, I think-
I was sick the
I think
entire rest of my
it's just-
vacation. Like, I mean, you can't fly without getting
Stay
sick
your second.
anymore. So bad.
So, it's not like you have two A's for beer, but if you don't.
Yeah.
Like magically. Like,
Yeah.
oh,
And then this does.
Wow, spent $1,000 and actually got something for it.
Yeah, I had a buddy who took like a
That's
trip to
what it's
Europe
at.
and on his return trip picked up dysentery in Seattle. Like
Oh,
literally
no.
dysentery. Mr. was like, hey, how's it going? He was like, no, it's bad, I
Yeah.
have dysentery. And I was like,
No, it's not.
Dysentery topia.
Yeah.
All right, so how do we finish this off? I agree with everything we've done so far. We just need a little bit more work. So we have first A. And then we need to be able to see AA at some point. There's no way to get from Q1 to Q3 or even Q2 to Q3 without having seen consecutive A's. So that's going to be what gets us from W1 to W2. How to finish it off? Yeah,
we're gonna need one more state. So I guess in this case, a Q4.
okay.
This will be our final state.
Mm-hmm.
If we have we can have from Q3 to Q4. If we have an A, that'll put us in the Q4 quadrant.
Okay.
Because whatever happened previously, we had AWA, and then now we're starting the new string on Q3 where we have
Yeah.
AWA.
So this is this
Yep.
A.
Yep. And
Yeah.
then
So this A is potentially this A.
potentially, yep. If we have a B at Q4, we go back to Q3. Because obviously we're in W2 someplace.
Yeah, to
And
be in Q4, we have to have seen an A as the last thing that we see. We cannot say in Q4 if we see a B.
exactly. And the last thing we need is if we're in Q3, we need a B to loop back to Q3. because we're in the W2 state someplace.
All right. The one thing that's missing is what do we do in Q4 on an A? Move it back to itself. Yeah. This is perfect. Yeah,
Would it not work if we combine like this Q3 and Q4? Because the way I see it was that Q2, we have the A. And then in Q3, in Q3, we
Yeah.
just loop back to itself if it's another A. And if it's a B, we just loop back to Q2.
so here's the proposed model. We need, what do we do with this? We have B, A, B, A. What do we think?
If you end with A, then that would work.
So I think we can actually get through this with 3 A's. So if we just took the string A, does that fit in AW1A, AW2A? We need at least 4 A's. But if we start in Q0, A, if this is a final state, then we would be accepting of this string. So I think that's why we need to distinguish Q3 and Q4. This is that first A that starts before W2, and then we need some other A that we've seen that is that last A. So this is a really good idea. I like the concept of being smaller and more minimal when possible. But we also have to verify and make sure that there are no possible exceptions. And that is one of the big challenges in this class from start to finish. You will come up with a solution and it will seem to you like a phenomenal solution that works for everything. It's very logical. You went through an excellent process to construct it. But out there somewhere, there is some counterexample of something that is not in the language that your DFA will accept. And again, this is not something that is bad if this is something that you construct. It's just an additional process that we have to go through once we have a solution. If you're working on something like a homework, you come up with a solution. If you come up with the very first thing that you think works without taking the time to truly verify it, you will produce something that gets points taken off because it's not quite correct. And again, excellent thought went into this, but there is a verification step that needs to happen. And make sure, absolutely sure, that there are no counterexamples in either direction. So 2 kinds of counterexamples that can happen. A string that's not in the language that your DFA accepts. Also there's a string that is in the language that your DFA does not accept. Really good idea. Very glad it was shared. It's always good to talk about why something does not work. Lots can be learned from that. Questions on this construction, this design, why this DFA works for this language? Any further examples? Anyone want to give me a string and watch me walk through the DFA to see whether it is or is not in the language? We will move on. As I've done with the others, there is a solution on the slide. For you to look back on. There it is. I think that is what we constructed. That, quite sure that's what we constructed. All right. That's all we're gonna do with DFAs because they're at that point pretty self-contained, and I feel like the next logical step is for you to go get some practice. Go do some homework, get stuck. Come to me in office hours. I'm happy to work with you as you get stuck or to verify an answer. I won't necessarily say too much, but I can say something like, I can see a counterexample, or even potentially, what about this string? So if you want to verify something with me, I am usually happy to do that. But we need to take some time to talk about a very important concept to this course, which is non-determinism. It's the first big thing that is difficult for a lot of people to wrap their minds around because it is a challenging concept. Computers don't do this, and it would be crazy if they did. But there's nothing that we have said that says that it's not possible necessarily, or that that's not quite right. There's a theoretical problem in computer science called P equals NP. Anyone heard of P equals NP in some other class that you've been in? So does anyone remember exactly what that is or what that means?
I don't think I fully understood it the first time I heard it anyway, so.
We're gonna drill it in here, hopefully,
Okay.
so that it makes a ton of intuitive sense. So you code up an algorithm to solve some problem. Let's say it's insertion sort. And that has a quadratic runtime in a deterministic environment, which means instruction by instruction, we're going to, in a single thread, go do the work to sort some array. Excellent. Now imagine that you had infinite parallelism. Not just one core, but you could call on however many CPU cores that you wanted. And you could parallelize whenever you wanted to whatever extent that you wanted. The P equals NP problem says that if a problem is solvable in polynomial time on a single core, is it possible to verify that solution and or solve it on an infinite number, an unlimited number of cores? Similar, if it's not, is this concept the same, where if you can solve something in polynomial time, or is it possible to verify something in polynomial time, or vice versa? So if you have an exponential problem that you can verify in polynomial time, an example of that would be password cracking. I think we'll get into that here in a second. But the idea is basically taking the modern computer and creating infinite parallelism for it. So in determinism, we basically can say, you can tie this back to the concept of a DFA. In every single state, for every single character, there is one and exactly one possible transition, which means that no matter where we are in the DFA, whatever character we see, there is a next state. There aren't multiple next states, there aren't no next states, there's exactly one next state, which gives us, given a string, there is only one path that can follow through the DFA. It's the same for any program you write. If you write a particular program and give it a particular input, you can use a debugger to go line by line through that program. And every time you run that debugger, it's going through the exact same line sequence. It might be jumping around as it loops some number of times, but when you run the program once and you run it again, that same loop is going to run that same number of times. It's not going to run 3 times in one execution and 6 times in the next. If you call this particular method 7 times in the execution of the program once, you run it again on exactly the same input, it's going to call that same method exactly 7 times. That's determinism. So every program you have ever written in any language for a computer is deterministic. But imagine that we didn't have to do that. So we'll take as an example, write a program that guarantees, I tell you my password is exactly 6 characters, thinking, there's no way you could ever crack my password. There are so many combinations of 6 characters that it's totally safe. But writing a program that would brute force it, how many attempts could it take in the worst case?
Well, it depends on what character.
What characters are allowed? Let's say it's just uppercase letters, lowercase letters, and digits. No symbols. I'm not smart enough to include symbols.
62? 62 then?
62 possibilities for any given character. In fact, there are 6 characters, says that. 62 to the 6th. Because repeats are allowed. Just because my password starts with an A doesn't necessarily mean that a lowercase a doesn't mean the second character is also going, there can't be a lowercase a. So if repetition is allowed, then we would have 62 to the 6th possibilities. Very crackable by a computer in brute force in under a second. Maybe a couple seconds, but very, very possible. Non-determinism, on the other hand, allows for that parallelism. Now you have an infinite number of cores. How are you writing this program non-deterministically?
I would branch at each character
Yeah.
or.
Exactly. So for the very first character, I'm going to include 62 cores. I'm going to say you continue as if the first character is a lowercase a. You continue as if the first character is a lowercase b, etc. So after one step, we have 62 threads running. Each of them has the first character as something that is different. At the next step, we're going to rope in another multiple of 62. So we have 62 times 62 cores running right now. Each of them has a different pair of characters at the beginning. And you can see that now in a linear amount of time based on the length of the password, it just takes 6 steps before one of those threads returns, aha, I was successful, I got in. It's no longer exponential in the length of the password because we can branch and use an infinite amount of parallelism. Suddenly, we have taken a problem that was exponential and brought it down to linear time. 6 steps instead of 62 to the 6th steps, which is a hell of a time increase. Man, wouldn't it be awesome if we had an unlimited number of cores to be able to do whatever it is that we need to do. As soon as we have to do something at scale, it's just rope in all of the cores and do that. So P versus NP is just saying if we have something that is deterministically, is there a difference between whether something can be done deterministically in polynomial time, or can we take some things that are exponential, and if we can verify them, is there any way that we can now, we can solve that problem in less than exponential time? So I guess if you've heard the term NP complete, there's this group of algorithms that we're going to call NP complete. And to be NP complete, we have a non-deterministic algorithm that is in polynomial time that can solve that. So using non-determinism, we can take this deterministically exponential time complexity problem and solve it in some kind of polynomial time with non-determinism. The $1 million question that is out there, that if any of you solve this, one way or the other, you will be an instant millionaire. In fact, I think there is a $1 million prize, but it's been $1 million prize since like the 90s. So it hasn't kept up with inflation at all. But if you can prove one way or another that these problems either can or cannot be solved deterministically in polynomial time, then I hesitate to call you rich with a one-time $1 million payment, but you at least have a nice jump start to your career. That said, it's been an open problem for a long time, and guesses out there are that this problem actually is not solvable. And we'll talk about this later in this course, that there are some true statements that cannot be proven. But this class of algorithms is all linked together by some deterministic algorithm. Like say there's an algorithm here that can be solved non-deterministically in polynomial time, but deterministically the best known solution is exponential. There's another problem over here. That means that there is a polynomial time conversion algorithm that says I can take this problem and in a polynomial amount of time, I can convert it into this problem. Which means that if I can solve this problem in polynomial time, I just use that polynomial time conversion algorithm, and this problem is solvable in polynomial time. There are links across that in this entire class of algorithms, NP complete, that if we solve one, we've solved them all. So we really only need to have a deterministic polynomial time solution to one of these problems. They include things like RSA encryption. They include things like the SAT problem. They include things like the knapsack problem, like the traveling salesman problem, if you've seen any of those before. So solve one, you've solved them all because there is a minimum spanning tree at the very least in this class of algorithms. They're all connected to each other via some polynomial time conversion. But the best known solution to any of them, deterministically, is exponential. And oftentimes they're trivial to solve non-deterministically in polynomial time. So interesting theoretical side note, but that idea will become relevant here as we start to use non-determinism to represent kind of what a DFA, what we've been using a DFA to represent, some language. We'll come back to that when we talk a little bit more theory, way later in the course, but. So for non-determinism, instead of having a single next step, now we can have multiple next steps. So Q0 on an A had a single successor state in a DFA. Maybe it's Q1. In an NFA, a non-deterministic finite acceptor, now we can go to Q1 and Q2. It really means or, but we explore them at the same time using non-determinism in the same way that password cracking says, all right, I'm just going to parallelize and check every possible first character at the same time. We're going to be exploring those branches non-deterministically at the same time. If a single thread returns accept, then we will accept. So let's give you an example of non-determinism just for that. Writing a program that verifies a password given to you is the correct password. So one way to understand non-determinism is to think of it as a verification algorithm. How long would it take you if I told you that my password was ABCDEF to verify that that is true? You would just have to type in linear time, ABCDEF, enter, and either you would be in my account or not. You would be able to tell me, yes, that is your password, or no, that is not. So it's a verification algorithm. It is the same theoretically to non-deterministically solving the problem and using infinite parallelism to check every password in that linear time. You just need a big enough network to be able to do that. So same idea, verification, infinite parallelism, attach yourself to whatever makes the most sense. I'll try to explain it using both for a while. But it's not the easiest concept to understand. You don't have any practice with it. It's a theoretical concept because we don't have non-determinism out there in the real world. But theoretically, it's a very important concept in terms of what is or is not possible with a large enough network. You could simulate non-determinism on some kind of large enough network, as long as your problem was capped by the size of the network. So verifying that password, how many attempts? One attempt, 6 character presses, linear in the length of the password. Another way to think about it, you crack the password, but rather than searching the entire space, you just somehow guess correctly. I like thinking about it in terms of that infinite parallelism. Whichever one returns the correct one, that's the one you win down. So let's give you a formal definition of an NFA. It looks kind of exactly like a DFA, except that the only change is in the transition function. Remember that the delta here is a transition function. We take the full set of states, but now instead of having a link from one state to another state, now we have to consider that each state can be linked to each other state on each character. So for each state, we have to look at every single character, and that is linked to a possibility of up to 2 to the Q, 2 to the number of states, number of possible states. So how complex an NFA can get is much more complex than a DFA can get. However, we'll go on and show this, that the class of languages that a DFA can represent is exactly the same as the class of language that an NFA can represent. And oftentimes, it's easier for you to invent an NFA than it is to invent a DFA. You have more tools at your disposal. I really want to just branch here at the same time. In an NFA, you can. In a DFA, you can't. So having the toolbox that is an NFA gives you an additional tool to solve the same problem. So it's worth looking at them for that reason. For now, let's just look at some key differences between them because we have some experience solving a DFA. So what differences exist between DFAs and NFAs in their construction? 3 big differences. First one is we actually allow what we call a lambda transition. Think of this as you've invented teleportation. You can move from one state to another state without consuming an input character. So there's some string that we're trying to determine, A, B, A, is this in some language? We don't care what it is. We're in Q0 as we're looking at this A. We can just jump to Q2 without consuming that A, as long as there is a lambda transition between Q0 and Q2. So we would have some Q0, some Q2, and we would have what we call a lambda transition. If that lambda transition exists, then you can, whenever you're here, you can just go here. No cost in the input. Questions on that concept? Teleportation, optional teleportation. You can be here or you can be there. And in non-determinism, you're both here and there. And if one place is the right place to be, great. The other clone dies. That's fine. There can be multiple transitions out of one state consuming the same input character. So now we have something like we have U0, U1, U2, we can have an A and an A. That is allowed. This was not possible in a DFA. Neither of these were possible in a DFA, but we can do something like this that says on an A, we're going to clone ourselves. One of you is going to go to Q1, one of you is going to go to Q2. If one of you is successful, yay, we were all successful. So that is difference number 2. Difference number 3, you do not need to specify every possible transition out of a state, which means that things like trap states are not necessary. If we try to consume a character from a state and there is no such transition out of that state, we just automatically reject then and there. We don't need to finish parsing the input. So in our example of something like AW1A, we saw a B from Q0. If there's only one way out with an A, we just deleted that entire trap state. We see a B from here. This is a perfectly valid start to an NFA. We see a B, there's no transition out of Q0 with a B, instant rejection. No further work needed. It is not complete like a DFA was complete. So those are our 3 major differences. Any questions about what any of these 3 mean? All right. Here's a completely useless example. I don't know what this NFA does, but it at least shows you the differences. We have a lambda transition between Q0 and Q2, which isn't accepting and doesn't do anything. But there's no specified transition out of Q2. So if you happen to find yourself in Q2, automatic rejections, because there's nothing you can do once you hit Q2. So that lambda transition is totally useless. You can teleport to a useless position anytime you're in Q0. Great. I don't know if I love this example. I just pulled it from the textbook. I would probably create something that makes a little bit more sense or has a little bit more use to it if we did that. But as an example, in Q1, there's a 0 that goes to Q2 and a 0 that goes to Q0. That's okay to have that branch. So lambda transition, don't have to specify every transition. There's also nothing on a 0 out of Q0. That's okay as well. Starts with a 0. You would actually have to check 2 things. Is there a 0 out of Q2? Teleport to Q2. Is there a 0 out of that? So we have to check kind of multiple branches if there are lambda transitions to try that. But we'll get into some examples of this tomorrow. But in the meantime, have a nightmare or 2 about non-determinism, and I will see you for more tomorrow. I have office hours after my next class, so in an hour. If you have any questions about getting started on the homework, anything that we've covered, feel free to stop by. I will see you then. If not, I'll see you tomorrow.